City Council study session. If we could please have the roll.
Mayor Karen Howe.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Kaylee Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
She is sick, and I'll be doing a motion for her afterwards.
Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Councilmember Sid Gupta.
Here.
Councilmember Roshino Farrell.
Here.
Thank you. I'll move to excuse Pamela Stewart tonight because she is quite ill.
Second.
Thank you. It's been first and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So we're going to go to the Pledge of Allegiance. And who will I pick on? There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And land acknowledgement, I am looking at Amy Lamb because she looks ready.
We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Thank you. And if we could have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So, public comment is next. Do we have any? Oh, isn't it?
We do it at the end.
Oh, sorry. My bad. I just skipped ahead. We were going to be done really early if I did that. So, instead, let's have a discussion about the Saholly Way corridor study. And so we've got Audrey, Greg, Jed, Brent, Janessa, and Donald, right? Great.
If I may, Mayor, I would like to introduce the team and thank you in advance for our approach for this evening's discussion. There's a lot of great information we look forward to sharing with you and hearing feedback from council. So we do have a roll plot in the center table that can just be used as a visual aid throughout the presentation. There are also some printouts in front of you, and we'll have the slides on the screen as well. Greg and I will be right here. It wasn't quite enough room. We didn't have as many tables, right? So, but we are right here and we look forward to adding to the discussion. So as we discuss the Saholly Way corridor improvement project and corridor study, this is a reminder that this study ultimately leads to adoption of a corridor plan, which is a vital thing to have for a corridor. It's the equivalent of a stormwater basin plan. It can also be thought of as a park master plan, kind of along those lines. It really sets the strategic framework and guidance for staff and developers and for the community in general for what the corridor could look like over time. And with that, I just also wanted to provide a few extra things. It's been a really neat process to be a part of. In addition to our tremendous consulting team, our staff, every division of Department of Public Works has been involved along the way, providing feedback. So it's been really neat to hear different voices along the way. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jed Ireland. He's our senior project engineer with the Department of Public Works and the project manager for this project. And he's going to introduce our consulting team.
Thanks, Audrey. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I'd like to introduce the team. I have with me, we can go to the next slide. I'd like to introduce Brent Powell for Pertite, and also Janessa Donato, and also with HWA Geosciences, Donald Huling. So I'm going to start with just a brief project overview discussing this and also the corridor study process. And then Brent will be following up with an update on where we are in the planning phase. And we're also going to get an interesting geotechnical discussion from Donald. And then Brent and Janessa will finish up with the alternatives discussion. So I'm just going to give up the plot right now. This is what we're asking council for. Do you like alternative 7 or 8 among the 3 alternatives that we'd like to bring to the public for a meeting in April is 7 or 8 are on the higher end of cost. They address speeds and safety. And we're going to be looking at the differences between those and which one fits the council's objectives better. And are there any other items that we should be addressing with the public? A future question to answer, we don't need to answer it tonight, is how to address the unmitigated slopes with stability risks on the corridor. There's 2 types of failures and slides. There's mitigated slides, which we know about, and there's also some unmitigated ones, and that's just a future thing to be taken care of.
Hey, Jed, if you would just get a little closer to the mic when you speak, that way if you can hear it on the speakers, then they're hearing it on the recording.
Okay. Okay, here's the limits. Here's the limits from Northeast 8th Street down to State Route 202. The current phase is the master planning phase that we're doing right now. Past this, we're going to be looking at design, permitting, and construction. The next 3 slides, we're going to be discussing what are the advantages of a corridor study. And part of it is the first thing is the comprehensive planning. We identify the current situation and also the future transportation demands. So we look at future conditions and also at what are all the needs, all the different modes of travel for all users so that that's safe for them and also accessible. We also look at the constraints in the natural environment, the environmental concerns, and also the geotechnical realities that constrain the project. We're learning about those early on so we can look at cost-saving measures, and those are going to impact and affect the different alternatives that we look at. And we also have an opportunity for this project as we had a broad community engagement. We involved the stakeholders early. And we also were able to, like, for instance, the water district on the north end, we worked with them on their water replacement program, their water main replacement, because it was impacted by our schedule and where our improvements are going to be located in the future. So that was another benefit, is that we're not going to have to relocate those again. Next slide. So this is master planning process. We want to look at, or really what we're looking for is what do we do near term and then long term on the corridor. We're going to have a long-term vision, but then we're going to have chunks that we can start building in the near term that don't need to be partnered necessarily with grant funding. And the steps to what we've done to achieve that is early last year, we had goal setting with the public and with council first, and we got the objectives, what was important to the community, and then we used all the different disciplines here on this team to do a technical analysis and cost estimating, so we could bring alternatives that meet the goals that we heard from last year. And so we're going to be going over that today. Like I said, we had a multidisciplinary team. Here we've got the divisions in your own city hall, and we also have our consultants and their disciplines listed here. So we had it was wide ranging. We looked at a lot of areas of disciplines, and also the partner agencies that are also stakeholders on this corridor or onto the state highway down at 202. And just to finish this segment, the existing conditions, you can see there's two halves. North of 25th Way, we have more of a rural condition, like an unincorporated King County, very similar. It just has wide shoulders and just 2 lanes, not really any other features. And then in the southern half near the commercial center, we've got sidewalk, bike lane, and a planter strip on one side only. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Brent for the planning phase progress.
Thank you, Jed. Good evening, all. Brent Powell with the Pertite consultant team. I'm the project manager for Pertite on this one. I'm going to talk through the progress we've made to date on the planning phase for this study. And I'll start here with a graphic that illustrates the alternatives development process that we are still in the middle of. And it started with the development of 10 potential alternatives for this corridor. We then did some initial analysis and screening to reduce that down to 6 candidate alternatives. And from there, we did several months of detailed analysis, cost estimating, technical analysis for stormwater, geotechnical, roadway design, of course. And we're now on the precipice of reaching our final 3 alternatives. That's what we intend for it to be, up to 3 public-facing alternatives, with the idea that next step here will be sharing those back with the public. To date, we have not shared directly with the public for feedback any of these 10 or 6 current alternatives, and the next step will be seeking public feedback on those 3, and then ultimately reaching a preferred alternative based on that public input, plus, of course, all the technical analysis and consultation with you all on the council here. Give a brief summary of what we've completed so far. You may remember the session we did about a year ago to evaluate the corridor at a high level, think about goal statements, and we took away a lot of great information from that session. We also then worked with the community on the heels of that to hear their perspective, and in many ways those were similar, but there were some differences between what you all recommended for the corridor and what the residents described as feedback. As I mentioned, we then went through a deep evaluation of existing conditions for the full length of the corridor segment, then building in the alternatives. Developing those alternatives is an important first step, and then, as I said, refining those through the technical process we went through. And a minute ago, Jed overviewed those partner agencies that we work with. We did have a couple of coordination meetings with those agencies to hear their feedback and any input for the project. I'll highlight that the public did, I think, come out in force for this one. We had a nice response of over 330 people who took an online survey that we prepared. We also did hold an in-person event in this room with a couple dozen attendees there, and we had a good brainstorming session asking similar questions to the public at that meeting. And then we've taken our time to review these corridor concepts in detail. In particular, some of the standout elements have been compliance with multimodal level of service and building out different configurations for pedestrian and bicycle elements. We've also invested in stormwater evaluations, which can frankly sneak up on a project later in design if they're not really studied at the early phases, and they can be millions of dollars different depending on what direction your stormwater management approach takes. And as we found, it's been important to study that up front, because we've even had some findings to date of dozens of millions of dollars different depending on what assumptions we're making in the corridor. And then Donald in a minute here is going to be sharing some very notable geotechnical evaluation findings that we've uncovered during this phase of the study, and that's particularly on slope stability. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it here to Donald and let him walk you through those constraints with just a quick intro by me that he's with HWA Geosciences. They're our geotechnical engineer on this consultant team for the study and for the design phase of the project as well. And we did evaluate the entirety of the corridor here from 8th all the way to SR 202. And I think many of you are familiar with the landslide history on this corridor, so that was of keen interest to Donald, and I'll let him share the results of his analysis.
I'm actually kind of disappointed I don't have entry music, but this is the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to talk about soils. Try not to fall asleep. So what we're looking at here is a LiDAR image of the entire corridor highlighted in red. And what I really wanted to note is that the project alignment can really be broken into 3 distinct geotechnical zones. The southern portion, pretty much stable conditions. We're not going to focus much time on those tonight. And then you move to the north, basically up till about 37th Way, and you get to a point where there's a lot of adjacent landslides that haven't yet affected the roadway, but we need to consider as we move forward in design. And then north of 37th, you have landslides that have significantly impacted Sahalee Way in the past, have been mitigated, but we need to consider those and what we do in those locations moving forward. So if you look at this a little zoomed in, what we've done is we've kind of highlighted, again, this is a LiDAR image, but we highlighted in red each one of these landslide zones. Each one represents, and there's 7 of them, 1 up in the north and 7 down here. Each one of them represents a distinct time in either recent history or ancient or prehistoric history in which there has been a landslide, and where they're denoted by these landslide scarps that you see in topography. This is one as well, but we did not really highlight it because it's far enough away from the road that it won't affect our project. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about zones 1 through 4, which are the northern portion. These are landslide areas that have affected Sahalee Way in the last 60 years and have been mitigated. To the north, this one right here is the Happy Valley landslide. It was movement in 1970s. They mitigated the movement through installation of horizontal drains. For those that don't know, horizontal drains is you drill into the side of the slope, you put a perforated pipe, it collects water out of the soil, collects it at the slope surface, and then you route it out to a suitable discharge location. It's a very common way to mitigate landslides that occur due to seepage, which almost all these do along the corridor, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So anyway, that occurred, been mitigated. Zones 2 and 3, which are right here, right where the road bends, those occurred between 1996 and 1997. Again, displacements within the roadway, again, mitigated by drains in 1997, so there's a theme here. Zone 4 right here happened in 1982. You had up to 13 feet of movement over several months. Again, horizontal drains were put in. These ones aren't as distinct to see on the roadway, but when you're driving through here, if you look up to the west, you can actually see the headscarp up on the side of the road where the soil used to be before it came down. This is a picture of that 1982 landslide. Again, that 11 to 13 feet. It's basically a slump failure that occurred there. Again, due to the soil conditions, they put in the drains. These are some examples of the drains downslope that are currently being maintained. And as you can see, water is flowing out of them. The more water you collect in here and divert away, the more stable your site is. Go into kind of what has been done in the past. Originally, when this Zone 4 landslide occurred, Golder and Associates, which is a geotechnical engineering firm, did a lot of the geotechnical borings in here and evaluations and was retained for the initial conceptual design of the roadway, or looking at what concepts would work. They did a stability analysis here, which basically said you can do some improvements in under static loading conditions and things are going to be roughly okay. Again, static loading, not earthquake. Subsequent to that, we got involved because Golder no longer exists. And we looked at the data they did and developed a much more elaborate geotechnical cross-section. And you can see right here, that's Sahalee Way. That's the headscarp you can see up at the top to the west. And this really explains why all these landslides are occurring. This soil right here is, just consider it very hard play sand. It's very permeable. Water can, when it hits the ground, can go through it and it goes down, infiltrates basically. And this green soil right here is like clay. So what happens is water goes down, it hits this clay, can't go down any further, and it looks for the downhill path to go. The downhill path, based on the way the soils are, is always towards the slope. Unfortunately, it's a Sahalee Way. So it goes out the slope. That increased water lubricates the base of the slide and you get a slide. This right here is all the slide mass that happened. The slide that occurred in 1982 was just a portion of this. This is a larger slide that probably happened again like the rest of them to the south prehistorically. And you see these soil units here. So we evaluated that in our own analysis, and we came up with very similar answers to Golder that when we look at the proposed improvements in this area, we get factors of safety at 1.7. Basically, all you need to know about factors of safety, if it's less than 1, it's bad. That means you're going to fail. If it's greater than 1, you're not going to fail. So this meets industry standards for static loading. Again, in lockstep with what Golder analyzed before. That's what's happening. There's the road, by the way. So, is it going to do it again? Oh, well, I'm not going to try it. So the thing that's a little bit different is we also evaluated the stability of those Zone 4, which is the 1982 slide, but you can assume that the results of Zone 4 are very similar to Zones 1, 2, and 3 as well, because it's all the same kind of rough geometry. And this basically indicates right here that you have a factor of safety slightly less than 1. And I mentioned before, factors of safety less than 1, not good. So this means that in a design earthquake, which for our industry is an earthquake that you assume is going to return every 1,000 years, it's a big earthquake. Obviously, we've never seen one. The last one was 1,100 years ago. That you're going to get some movement in the slope. And we did a displacement analysis, and that movement is on the order of several inches. It's less than a foot. So it's not catastrophic, oh-so landslide kind of movement. It's, you've got to probably repave and regrade a little bit. So during a seismic event, you're going to get some movement out there, and that's something we need to acknowledge under the current loading conditions. One thing we're doing here, one thing that's really important is that the drains in this area continue to function, because that is what is keeping this site stable. If those drains stop functioning, then water is going to build up and you'll start to see movement again under regular static loading conditions. What we are doing, and we're actually in the process of today, is we're installing a slope inclinometer right here, which is basically a device that will, you drill a boring into the ground. This one we're taking to 125 feet. You put a pipe in it, and you can drop an instrument, and it'll tell you when the first time you do drop the instrument, it should be vertical. And this is some outputs to it. And then the pipe, if the land moves, the ground starts to move, the pipe deflects, and the instrument will read it, and it'll tell you where the deflection is. We've put that instrumentation in the event that for some reason something drains plug here, and we start to see movement. You can go out there and read that thing and get a lot of really quick information for a quick, appropriate fix to the movement. So it's a preemptive measure that we're putting in to help the city in case something happens. The next area is going to the south of 37th, and this is areas where these landslides are occurring for the same reason as the ones up there. It's just they have not reached the road yet. But what I really want to point out here is that Zone 5, which is right here next to the intersection, and Zone 6 right here, those headscarps are feet off of the back of the fog line right now. So these soil conditions here are good soil, high shear strength. You don't expect significant sliding except the seepage-driven part, which the seeps are down here. So what we would expect here from a future slope movement perspective is that over winter processes, freeze-thaw, you're going to loosen the soils on those steep slopes, and eventually at some time period between 10 and 25-year intervals, you generally get a slough of that 3 to 5 feet of soil, and it exposes new soil, and it tends to retreat back slowly. Zone 5 right here is probably the steepest of all of them, and likely the one that would move the soonest just due to how steep it is. Zone 6 is also very close to the roadway, but it's not as steep. But the challenge of Zone 6 is if it does move, there's a whole bunch of utilities in there carrying water. That if that breaks that utility, this goes from a slump to a water. I mean, it just makes it a lot worse. So I would say a failure here is more likely first. A failure here would be more challenging because it would probably take out more of the roadway. This is kind of an example of what we would expect the progression of something if it did happen over time is you're going to start off with a crack off your fog line. The crack will move further in if you didn't mitigate it. And this is an example of what it can do if it continues. This is very much like what the 82 slide looked like. It's just this one's in Edmonds because I had a picture of it. So again, what we're proposing to do is we were right now in Zone 4 today. We were installing the slope inclinometer on the shoulder of the road. We're planning to, in the coming weeks, to install one right here, and then we're on right here in these critical areas, again, to preemptively be able to determine if something does move, to be able to come up with an appropriate fix quickly. And the plan would be you would put them in the ground, take an initial reading, and then you probably read them once or twice during the winter because that's the time things would going to move. Or if somebody said, hey, there's a crack that developed, we'd go out and read it and then come up with a solution. So going backwards, in any of the alternatives that we look at along this corridor, it's likely going to be doing something at the top of Zone 5 and Zone 6, which are really close to the lands, or close to steep slopes that have experienced movement and we expect to move in the future. So it's likely that this project will need to mitigate somehow in these locations to make sure that any movement that occurs downslope, which likely will over the design life of the road, does not affect the road. And so what we've kind of looked at is there's some ways to do that. Essentially strategically placed tangent pile walls or secant pile walls are likely the best solution in those very specific areas. What these are is you drill a hole, they call it a shaft, it probably goes down 50 feet, about 3 foot in diameter generally, and you fill it full of a rebar cage and concrete. A tangent pile wall, they're closely spaced. And a secant pile wall, they're overlapped. The reason you'd look at different ones, secant pile walls are a little more expensive, but the nice thing about them is there's no gap between the concrete. You basically made a concrete wall, so if things downslope of your concrete wall fail, your soil above it's not going to mitigate or migrate through due to water over time. So those are kind of some of the solutions that we would expect to want to implement in the areas where the landslides are currently coming close to the roadway but have not encroached in it. Our approach in areas where landslides have already impacted the road in the past, i.e. north of 37th, would really be to do no harm. And what I mean by that is if you're doing any improvements in that land, you don't want to add any additional load to the roadway. So, raising the grade would add additional road in conventional construction. Widening the road would add additional in conventional construction. But there are things like lightweight fill materials that you can use that will offset things. They make lightweight cellular concrete that you can put in where you take out heavy soil, put in this stuff that's really light, and that would allow you to achieve that do no harm approach. So I think with that, I'm going to either open it up for questions or pass it back to...
Yeah, we'll talk through this slide first and then have a discussion opportunity for this. So one of the things we thought was important to understand once this information came to light was, what are we talking in terms of cost if you wanted to go the mitigation route? And I want to be very clear, you don't have to decide on that or necessarily even weigh in on that tonight. We're going to table this and do some extra analysis and come back later to really nail down an answer on this question. But our initial cost estimate for the wall systems south of 37th, for those 3 zones that Donald was just talking through, would be around $15 to $20 million total to reinforce those 3 slope areas. That work we've been discussing could happen as part of a Sahalee Way corridor redevelopment. It could happen before a Sahalee Way corridor redevelopment. It could happen potentially after a redevelopment effort. So there's flexibility there. And unfortunately, though, we haven't been able to identify any funding sources that seem like they would be, trying to fund this type of improvement. There is a FEMA funding program, at least currently there is a FEMA funding program. We will see if that remains, but the way it's been operating in recent years does look to these larger scale failures that really would compromise life safety. And as Donald was describing, this is more of a gradual kind of suffocation of the corridor type of thing. So it wouldn't be the type of candidate project that we think would be competitive for that type of federal grant. So our next step with this is we're going to work with Jed, Donald, the whole team here, do a risk matrix to provide some extra information for you all about trade-offs, benefits, costs for this. So again, we don't have that prepared right now. We're not seeking full resolution on this question, but we did want to bring Donald in today to share these findings. And I think with that, I will pass it back to you, Madam Mayor, to open it up for any discussion we'd like to have here, particularly with Donald's expertise.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, team, one thing that I think would be helpful, and I know because I've sat with Jed and gotten the individual rundown, but Is this only if we build something new, or is this necessary for right now?
From a north of 37th, maintenance of the drains is necessary moving forward, or else you're going to have a problem. South of 37th, if you just decided, hey, we're not going to build anything out there, this problem doesn't go away. Over time, and on the order of 10 to 15 years from now, especially Zone 5, which is near 37th, is likely going to have a near surface skin slide that will affect a portion of the northbound travel lane. Just looking at the geometry and how close it is. So regardless of if we do anything, that will likely occur. Now, do you have to proactively make that not occur? Because again, it's not a catastrophic failure. It's something that's going to affect. You could come back in and repair that under an emergency repair perspective. But if we do something, i.e. we change the fog line in those areas, then at that point we're in a requirement to bring the stability of that section of roadway up to industry standards, which means you'd have to implement something. Now, if you did something there and you shifted the fog line to the west, you could make the argument that we're not adding any additional load and we're not changing anything to the slope, so therefore you don't have to address it as part of the project. So it's not an easy yes or no, but there are some. Those two, Zone 5 and Zone 6, are definitely areas that I think within the next 10 to 20 years, there will probably be something there that the city will have to fix if it's not preemptively addressed.
Well, I imagine council has lots of questions. For people that do have questions, you might want to just do this for me, or just let me know who has a question now that they'd like to ask. Council. I can't tell. Really? Nobody? Nothing? Seriously? Okay.
Yeah, so hi, Doug, or Donald, excuse me, Kent Treen, Samaria City Council. And so best practice, so I'm looking at this project from a safety point of view first and foremost. So best practice on this roadway on sections 5 and 6, would it be to do the secant wall plus push the fog line to the west?
If you put the secant pile wall in, the location of the fog line is, because you're going to design that secant pile wall to be for movement or failures not to go past it. There still might be some failures downslope, but you're going to design it to be stable. At that point, you could leave your fog line at the current location, which means you wouldn't have to deal with impacting right away on the other side of the roadway as much. It just depends on what the roadway geometry that's chosen based on the alternative that's chosen on exactly where everything's going to go. But you would pick a location that fits your alternative for the secant pile alignment. But I don't think, other than if you wanted to move the fog line because you wanted a multi-use trail on that side, then you'd move the fog line. But moving the fog line to me was something, if there's financial constraints in which we can't address this right now, and you want to do some improvements on the corridor because of other safety issues, that may be an option, is to, in those areas, try to do some horizontal shifts of the alignment such that you can get away from that, which what that does is it doesn't solve your stability issue, but it buys you time. Because again, these kind of slides that would occur at that location, predominantly Zone 5, are generally thin. You lose 3 to 5 feet at a time. You don't usually lose substantial, you wouldn't usually lose the whole road. That's a little bit different on Zone 6 because you might get that. How steep it is? Well, Zone 6 is less how steep it is. I mean, it's steep and it has the potential to slide, but Zone 6 has a substantial amount of water carrying utilities that run down that are conveyed down that ravine. And so if you get one of those slides there, you break a utility that carries a lot of water, then all of a sudden you take a gusher that goes out down there and you add that water to it, and a small slide 20 minutes later takes out the whole road. which isn't usually a life safety issue because that usually gives you time to get people away, block the road, but it's definitely an impact to operations of the city, so.
How far out could I put a secant wall if it's, like you said, 50 feet? Can they be taller than 50 feet?
Oh, yeah,
so
you can,
go-
what you do when you design a secant pile is you figure out where does it need to be for the proposed improvements. The taller your retained face of the secant pile, which means the farther you push it out, the deeper you've got to go and the bigger diameter you got to go. So again, the design team, when we get to that point, would be looking at optimizing the preferred section of roadway versus the cost to stabilize it with a secant. If you put the secant pile on the existing fog line and did shift it, that secant pile is going to be less expensive than if you shifted it out 20 feet because you're just going to it's going to go to being very tall.
Right, but if I have other challenges on the other side of the road.
Yeah, exactly. You got to look at all those challenges, and those are something the team will do when we get to that point.
Thanks.
Councilmember O'Farrell.
Thank you, Kent. And forgive me if you've already answered this because there's a lot of information, but even if we did not go with any of these alternatives, we decided to leave the road as it is right now, this map that you're showing us with all the landslide zones, we still have work to do, would you say?
If you did none of the improvements, you would still have a targeted risk at zone 5 and zone 6 that could happen and have impacts to the thing. Whether you addressed that proactively through putting a secant pile wall or shifting the alignment to buy time, both of those could be done. Right now, I've worked with a lot of agencies that see these kind of things and weigh the risk through a risk management, like Brent was talking about. And the solution they come to is right now, we're just going to watch it. Mm-hmm. And right now, we're setting ourselves up by putting those slope inclinometers in, which we're doing today and we're going to do in coming weeks. So that way, if we start to see a crack in the pavement develop that's circular in nature and indicative of a landslide, we can get a phone call, we can go out there in an hour and drop something down and tell you really quickly what's happening, how significant it is. Is it something where you come out with an excavator, block the road, and put some aggregate back in here and your problem is temporarily solved? Is it something bigger? So yes, even if you did nothing, you still have a challenge, but what you do about it, there's options.
So for zone 5, zone 6, and particularly zone 5, watching those inclinators and just seeing what kind of movement happens over the next, say, you were saying 10 to 25 years, somewhere like in there, depending on if we see any cracks in the road, etc. And then north of 37th Way, as we continue down that hill down to 202, even if we did nothing to that and we didn't do anything to increase the load on that part of the road, is there issues on that section that we should be addressing now too?
North of 37th, again, in the current condition, it's stable statically with the drains functioning. So the biggest thing, keep the drains functioning, maintain them, do that, which the city is doing, and that's great. So as long as those function, that's great. The challenge with drains is over time, even with maintenance, they tend to silt up and they tend to become, so at some point in the future, which we hope is 75, 100 years down, those drains may not function as well and they may have to be reinstalled. Again, that's long term, so that's one thing. The other thing is that you have to understand that during a design seismic event, which is a big seismic event, you could have some displacements here that are on that order of 2 to 6 inches of movement. That's going to have offsets in pavement. That's going to make an uneven road. It could make it challenging for emergency vehicles to go through this area. The challenge with those is when you look at I pulled up the cross section again, that landslide for zone 4 and the other ones are deep. It's 75 to 80 feet deep before you get to the stuff that isn't moving, or not moving, hasn't moved. Stabilizing that under seismic event is a really, really, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It's something that it's cost prohibitive. Okay. So you're trying to mitigate that. And again, this is where I come into if you did nothing, you're already doing no harm. You're not, if you're going to build something there, you want to make sure you don't add any additional load and make the condition worse. And lots of agencies have taken that approach on these cost prohibitive landslides. in my career at least.
And Donna, last question. When you say increase the load, do you mean when you may change the design of the road as it is right now?
Yes. Yeah,
And how it, okay.
Yeah, so if you're going to widen the road
Yeah.
or raise the road, you're taking fill and you're putting it on. That fill has a weight. And when
Okay.
you put that additional weight on the top of a slide, it makes it want to move.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Gupta.
Thank you for the presentation. Do you have a rough estimate on the difference in cost between a tangent pile and a secant pile wall?
Not specific unit costs. I can tell you that a tangent pile wall is much more cost effective. And the reason is a tangent pile wall, you're not drilling through concrete. So a secant pile wall, you drill a pile, and then you come back in and you drill over both piles. And that takes a lot of effort and time because you're drilling through concrete you just placed. So that comes with a cost. I'd say it's at least a third more. Whereas a tangent pile wall, you may have 3 to 4 inches between them. And so therefore you're not drilling through concrete, you're drilling through soil. Generally, I would say for this project, I would tend to lean towards trying to make a tangent pile wall work because secant piles are they're an option. They're guaranteed to never have migration of soil through the face of the wall. But in this scenario, let's say we built a tangent pile wall and we did a concrete facing on the exposed portion of it downslope so that nothing could go through. And then you get a slide down below. Well, you're going to know that slide happened and the city could go back in and backfill up against it so you didn't have stuff going through it. So I don't think it merits the cost necessarily of a secant pile wall, but a secant pile wall is an option there. But if I had to guess, I'd say it's about a third more.
I have just a couple of questions. A study was done prior. Can you give me the year that was done again?
Well, there was kind of several studies. There was the Golder. Well, there's been a whole lot of studies.
Okay.
Every landslide has its own geotechnical report that was done. And
Okay.
Some of them, several of them. A lot of them done by King County and stuff. The Golder one, which is Zone 4, I'd have to look back.
I believe that was about 10 years ago.
Okay.
In 2015 or so timeframe.
And where I'm going with this is trying to understand, with the different studies, did the analysis kind of come to the similar conclusions to what you're drawing? So what I'm wondering is, it sounds like prior councils have known about this for some period of time. And can I ask if this is probably a question for Audrey, if she knows, have we done any mitigation beyond if there was an event that required immediate restoration?
Excuse me, not to my knowledge. So we do monitor the drains and
Right.
maintain the drains regularly. We are in the process of setting up a monitoring system for them so we can have remote access, so we have as much advanced warning as possible if
Is that the
groundwater
video
flows
stuff?
change. So, pardon?
Is that the video thing you had brought up, I think, before at a much earlier council meeting? So it's not a video one, it's just a...
No, that system will likely entail is some kind of a system that would have a baseline for the amount of groundwater that flows through those drains over time, so we can tell if a smaller amount would probably be the most concerning, because then we would be alerted that the drains are blocked and have an issue for that time of year, of course, but we need a few years to collect that data over time. Right now, we do maintain the drains and have visual observations that we conduct, but we don't have a kind of more of a machine monitoring in place.
Yeah,
We're working on
I
that too.
believe the last documented significant landsliding on that zone north of 37th was in like 1997. So we're
Okay.
like 27, 28 years ago.
And as you've been looking at this segment of road and anticipate, you said, just static, and then mentioned, okay, all bets are off a bit if it's not static. And will you be giving us more information about, like, to what degree does it really become constitute a major problem? Like, what force would it take?
So there's tried not to go down a rabbit hole where we're here for 5 hours because I could. So static is, as we're sitting here right now, design earthquake is a big earthquake that comes back at 1,000 years. The USGS has loading associated with numerous events in between those. They have a 100-year event. They have the 475 event. They've got other events. So right now we have looked at our stability analysis to go, okay, what is the factor of safety and expected displacements under the thing we have to design the road for?
Right.
But since we have the model built, like literally I could go back to the office and it would take me 45 minutes to plug in 5 or 6 different earthquake loadings, and tell you, okay, what is the factor of safety? And what that does is that would tell you, is the trigger event an event that happens at a 100-year event? Is it a 475-year event? And that's a very great question because that's exactly what WSDOT does when they're looking at their structures. You analyze for a 1,000-year event, but they also want to know what it's going to do in the service event. You make sure it doesn't collapse in the 1,000-year event, you protect life safety, but you want it to be functional after a 100-year event. That's kind of what WSDOT does. So we could do that, and that's something that's, again, we can do as we move forward, but I have not done it yet.
Okay. And the drains that we have now, that's best available science, is that correct?
That is the best, I mean, geotech hasn't changed a ton in 50 years. And so it's, yeah, I mean, it sounds hokey, but drilling holes in the ground to collect water and get them out is the best available science. What I was talking to the city about is one of the things that you really want to do, and this is what we were talking about, the instrumentation, is there's no data on flow rates on those drains, which again, the drains are flowing at, some gallon per minute. And what you really want to know from the city's perspective is, are those drains starting to function less? So that's where if you put some instrumentation on a select number of those drains randomly and around the location, not all of them, then you could go, okay, we've got plots of data and we're starting to see less water out of these things. That tells you your drains are starting to not function as well. And so you have to look, do you go in and jet them to try to open them up and get more flow again? Or are they getting to the point where you need to replace them? Because you want to do that before they stop working completely and the actual thing moves again. So.
Okay, and you showed a list, or a list of partners was shown, like our first or second slide that Judd showed. Does this mean that all of these partners have access to this data? So the Plateau Water or the North Water District has the same information? Are we sharing all of this data right now, is I guess my question, with our partners, with King County and others?
At this point in the study, we haven't shared it yet.
Okay.
But I don't know that we'd have any problem with that. From Audrey, Greg, John?
We have had a few meetings with King County just to understand from their portion of the roadway what monitoring and investments they have made previously. So we've had initial meetings, but we'll obviously continue those, and no problem sharing the data.
Okay, because I'm also trying to understand what their role would be potentially in this too. So just getting a better, deeper understanding of who else can we tap on the shoulder to say, how are you going to help? Okay, Council, if there's nothing else, are we moving over to look at this, or what's next?
We do have some extra slides for you here to talk through the alternatives. And so I am back in the meeting and sharing my screen again here. So we wanted to walk through the alternatives process. As you remember from the first slide here, we do have some questions on the alternatives, and that's what we're getting to at this point. So I will very briefly give an overview of the 10 alternatives that we started with. These were alternatives, again, we built off of the goal setting and feedback we heard from you all and the public. This was a set of alternatives that included spot treatments all the way up through full corridor redevelopment. There were some treatments that took things all the way up to SR 202, but many of these treatments stopped at 37th. And the list of alternatives that we worked down to the final 6, they all end at 37th. So that question about doing no harm here, we're certainly not proposing to do any harm to the portion up between 37th and SR 202 with these 6 alternatives. We've retained a spot treatment alternative in alternative number 2 We have different versions of a pedestrian-only focused alternative that we called 3A and 3B. And then we have 7 and 8, and we're going to talk in detail about those, really trying to capture all modal users, pedestrians, and bicyclists. And I should mention transit is incorporated throughout all of this. And then the final alternative that we advanced here is number 10, which was the application of the city's standard cross-section for a principal arterial roadway, which can either be a 5-lane facility or a 3-lane facility. Based on our traffic modeling, we thought a 3-lane facility was all that you would need for long-term sustainability out here. So I'm going to share a few details on alternative number 2 and then give some high-level summary comparison of everything here. At this point, we are proposing to advance alternative number 2, and this is really a very foundational alternative. We viewed this as our spot treatment approach. So everything that's incorporated here is also incorporated in the remaining alternatives. So that's why I want to take some time to walk through it here. Number 1, we heard a lot of feedback about transit improvements that are needed in the corridor, particularly stop enhancements and safety enhancements at crossings to allow people to connect across the busy Sahalee Way corridor to reach a transit stop, either in the morning on their way to work or coming home from work. So that's included upgrades at intersections, attempting as best we can to achieve at least some minor speed reductions at those unsignalized intersections for the bus stop locations. I think many of you are aware, traffic speed correlates to higher fatality rates, so that's a key sensitive area for safety improvements. There are a couple portions here adjacent to the Sahalee Golf Course area. The Sahalee Greens and Plateau Point neighborhoods do not currently have left turn lanes. That's another safety treatment we identified, really a proactive treatment. This corridor fortunately has not suffered from a bad safety record, but there's always opportunities to be proactive. This is one of those to try to separate out the left turn movements from the higher speed trailing traffic that might be behind them. There's an intersection out here that we studied that does show some level service E, which would be a failing grade if you all judge this in your concurrency program, and currently I will say you do not judge it in your concurrency program, so you're not required to change this particular intersection, but it does have one side street that bubbles up to a level service E. That's the 223rd intersection there. So we have treatments for that. And then some additional sidewalk segments. One of those would be over by the trailhead to the preserve, which is in between 36th and 37th. We did hear a lot of public feedback that that's a destination for people. Today, if you have to walk there, you're crossing the roadway at an unsignalized crosswalk at 36th or further up at the signalized crosswalk at 37th, but then you're walking in the shoulder to actually reach the recreational facility there. And then the other sidewalk segment would be from 217th, which is that Plateau Point area. That's the one development on the east side of the corridor. Currently, if you wanted to live there and use transit, you would again have to walk to and from that transit via the shoulder. So this is a proposed sidewalk segment to enhance that connectivity. And then there's a couple various safety spot treatments as well that we've considered. And again, all of these bullet points are folded into the remaining alternatives as well. There's a lot of text on this slide. I don't want to belabor too many points here, but this is a way of illustrating some of the key differences between the 6 alternatives we were studying. The bold elements are the ones that are changes from the existing condition. So you can see there's obviously a different combination of those for all 6 options. And what I do want to zoom in on is we had a really productive workshop session with all of those different representatives from the Public Works Group. And that occurred in December, and we settled on a recommendation to advance alternative 2, which is that spot treatment. Alternative 3B, which would build a continuous sidewalk and still provide shoulders for bike use on the corridor, and that sidewalk would go all the way up to Northeast 37th. And then alternatives 7 and 8 are the ones that we wanted to bring to this group tonight to discuss in more detail. Both of these address pedestrian needs with a similar type of treatment, but they have a principal difference in the proposed speed limit. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Janessa to talk through that difference in more detail.
Good evening. Just a quick introduction. My name is Janessa Donato with Pertit. I'm one of the engineers on the project team. And with the next few slides, I'll be sort of summarizing the main differences between Alternative 7 and Alternative 8. The core difference essentially is the posted speed limit north of Northeast 25th. So north of Northeast 25th, Alternative 7 proposes to maintain the existing speed limit of 45 miles an hour, while Alternative 8 proposes to lower the speed limit to 35 miles an hour. And to encourage that lower target speed, Alternative 8 includes a series of proposed intersection treatments, most likely roundabouts, to kind of prepare or produce that traffic calming effect. And just to reiterate, a key element considered during development of the alternatives was improving pedestrian safety, or both safety and comfort for pedestrians and bikes. And in order to achieve that, Pertit applied the level of traffic stress metric, also known as LTS. And just as a quick refresher, that is expressed in as an integer from 1 to 4, with a lower number indicating the greater likelihood of users to access a facility. And basically, the scores are determined on the separation of vehicles from pedestrians and bikes. How and the type of separation is going to depend upon the speed. And so in the north segment, from Northeast 25th to Northeast 37th, both Alternative 7 and Alternative 8 are proposing a shared use path on the west side. And in the higher speed Alternative 7, the separation, actually a barrier treatment is proposed as the separation, while in the more sort of urban setting of Alternative 8, a planter strip is proposed. And then in this slide, we want to provide a quick summary table of the two alternatives. Again, the biggest difference in the north segment, north of Northeast 25th, is the speed limit, 45 versus 35. Again, they both are proposing a shared use path on the west side, with the separation difference being due to or determined by the speed. Sorry, I think I missed the last slide. I wanted to mention that both of the alternatives do meet the multimodal level of stress target of 2. That's listed in the TMP for both peds and bikes. And then the speed control strategy for Alternative 7, we're implementing some minor treatments at pedestrian crossings, such as curb extensions, curb bulbs, where in Alternative 8, we're proposing a series of roundabouts. And then the next row there, just as a quick background, Pertit generated some simulated vehicle travel times, and the results are listed in that row there. As you can see, Alternative 8, the travel times are a little bit higher, but that's to be expected as kind of the increases are kind of surrounding the areas where we're proposing roundabouts. Kind of makes sense. You want cars to slow down as they approach the roundabout. And then lastly, the bottom row there is a quick comparison of the planning level opinion of cost for the total corridor. So from 37th to 8th, we have 60.8 versus 82.7. Again, that's $2024 excluding the slope mitigation. So that's a difference about $22 million. And then lastly, we also just wanted to provide a summary of all of the alternatives. These are the initial planning level opinion of cost for all 6, broken down by the north segment and the south segment, as well as the overall corridor total. And just want to highlight that the numbers that you see here sort of do reflect kind of what was expected, with the baseline alternative 2 being on the lower end, and then the city standard principal arterial of alternative 10 on the high end.
And we certainly recognize those are very large figures. Want to emphasize that as part of this study, we have not reached this stage yet, but once we nail down a preferred alternative, we'll be very focused on figuring out a phasing plan, recognizing that it's very unlikely that maybe even a $20 million project would happen all in one phase. We would explore how to break that down over time, even considering different inflation rates that we'd want to apply to those separate projects, and really giving you all, that's I think a very core element of this master planning work is the financial understanding of the choice that you're making with selecting a preferred alternative here. So more to come on that, but just wanted to disclose that, again, those are all 2024 numbers, and we would break them down into different projects. Jed, I think you were going to take us home here, Jed.
Oh, thanks, Brent. Okay, yeah, so just looking ahead, we're looking at public engagement for probably the first week of April is what we'll be targeting. And so we want to share these concepts with them and get their feedback so we can come back to council. And so we're going to collect that data, and so we're preparing for that. That's the purpose of one of the outcomes of this meeting we're looking for. And then we're also going to concurrently be doing the risk analysis to really think about how do we analyze that risk of those slides that might happen 10 to 25 years out in the future. And so you'll have that information as well after the public feedback is gathered. We'll come back to council in June is our plan to stay on target with our schedule. And then after that, once we get the feedback from council and the selection, we're going to do a final analysis to higher resolution, look at the cost estimates, the phasing. And so we have a whole package, a corridor plan will be developed that can be presented to council. And we're tentatively looking at adoption for that for October, which will then authorize to go to 30% design. From a 30% design, then you could start breaking out specifically features of that project that could be done on in a phasing basis. And then next slide. Okay, so this is one of the early slides that we started with, and we're just coming back to, we're looking to discuss the alternative 7 and 8. How do these meet at the high end for an alternative starting at the low end at 2, and then 3B, and then 7 and 8 at the high end, which is more closely aligned with council objectives. If we can choose, we would take that to the public. And then is there anything else that we should be getting when we reach the public meeting in April that we can bring back to council? And then just in the future, again, not for tonight, but what should we do to address the unmitigated slopes? And then, is there any slides? Is that it?
Yep, that's the end of our slides there.
Just really quick, Jed, I see the large maps out here in front. Are we orienting people to those? Is it get up and take a look while we're ruminating and contemplating, or how are we engaging with those, and what do they show us?
Oh, sure. So we've got handouts right now. We've got the different alternatives. Our focus that we're thinking is 7 and 8. And so we can talk about some of the features of that. Those have more features than the earlier options. So I think a discussion of 7 and 8 is going to answer a lot of questions about, but we can address things about 2 and 3B as well, or any of the alternatives. 7 and 8 is because I think there's a big cost difference in those two. There's $20 million between those. And so we would like to figure out, we would like to break it down to have one concept alternative that we could take to the public among the 7 and 8. This roll plot really is showing schematics on a aerial image. It doesn't share a lot, but if it helps to move about to look at that, we will advance it to where you want to look. We also have schematics here, these are versions of what we have in our slide deck. So we could either put it up on the slide, but if you wanted to, we have also a mic, a roving mic. If someone wanted to point out a feature, and we could actually go up to the board and we could look at it up there. So it's just providing an alternative. We could do it through slide deck, or we could look at one of these stations.
And if I could add on to that, the boards behind some of the council members there, those are exact copies of the handouts that you have here for alternative 7 and 8. They're obviously just larger there. And this schematic view is showing an aerial background, and this is specifically alternative 8 because we wanted to just illustrate in more detail where those roundabout locations are proposed to be. And that is not, you don't have a handout of that. That's just a roll plot in front of you there.
Well, what my thoughts are right now is that to have council ask some questions before we stand up, but then I would propose that we stand up, walk around, and just kind of go through what you have here and on the boards over there. Because I think the interactive discussion based on the fact that all of us kind of gathered around looking at the same thing will give us more. So council, do you have questions you want to ask at this point? I'm seeing, okay.
But it's not a question, it is my decision. So I'm like 3B and 8 all the way, but I like that we're going with 2 as well. I would say 8 because $20 million versus one lawsuit, but having that 10 miles an hour slower is my choice. So 2, 3B, and 8 is my choice. Oh, and yes, I was at OSO. Everyone knows that. I was there for 3 weeks. So yes to the mitigation. Absolutely.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, so my first question, I guess, is to a petite person. So the earlier study that was done on here, one of the things that came back to council at that time was the use of the recommendation at that time was for best flow of traffic was roundabouts. Second thing that the roundabouts do is it provides the safest intersections then become safer. So like, I'm going to say Mayor Clark, Councilmember Clark, I like 8 in that, what I like about 8 is I like the roundabouts, but I also then understand too that there's roundabouts take up more land, therefore if these roundabouts and then looking at kind of trying to do an overlay here, the roundabouts end up landing on some of those areas where there's slide risk. So, but the comment that Donald made was that, we could fix that with these pylons. So first of all would be, I kind of am wondering why Petite only came with one option that has roundabouts, and what would be the additional cost if I put roundabouts on another plan, say 3B or even 7? Or 2, what if I did roundabouts on 2 on the stopgap one, but then we also did roundabouts?
If I may, really quickly, Councilmember, I just wanted to point out before we continue our discussion that some of these refinements, like roundabouts, are mirror that. Right now, we will approach this in a more detailed fashion once we have a preferred alternative and go through design phase. So it could be a roundabout, it could be a different method of intersection control, but I'll let Brent follow up.
Sure. I'll add that roundabouts are very compatible with every alternative that we have here. They are included in alternative 8 specifically to achieve the slowing effect for drivers to lower that speed limit and have some physical devices that enforce it. But Councilmember Treen, it absolutely could be added to extra intersections on any of the alternatives. There's of course of cost to do that. Several of the alternatives we were trying to capture the lower end of cost versus the higher end of cost. So, you could maybe find a middle ground if you went down that path, but they're absolutely compatible, and they do have a number of important benefits: safety, pedestrian accessibility across them for transit stops, things of that nature. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Lamb.
On the less expensive options, there aren't the traditional bike paths. It looks like it is alternative 10 that has the traditional bike paths. So when we're looking at bike paths, it looks like we're going directly to shared use paths. Is there a reason for that?
The reason is rooted in the current version of the multimodal level of service guidelines that you have in the TMP, and that reflects back to the level of traffic stress metric that Janessa spoke to. And frankly, this is an area where the industry has evolved quite a bit. So current, bike lanes out there today would not meet your level of traffic stress targets for this roadway. The solutions that do meet that are ones that physically separate the bikes from vehicles. So just a painted buffer line is not sufficient. Even you'll see some roadways that have those like vertical pylons that you can drive over with your car without damage. Even that's not sufficient. A widened buffer that's just channelized, that's not sufficient. You need some sort of hard feature that if a vehicle were to hit it, they would deflect their wheels and you'd protect the cyclist. So there's a couple of solutions that we do include across the different alternatives. The most common one we do list is a shared use path. The shared use path is particularly effective in a corridor like this because it's such a long corridor. It's not one where we'd expect very, very significant amounts of pedestrian or bicycle activity, but there's some degree of interest in that. So the shared use path is advantageous because you get to narrow the treatment. If you built sidewalks plus multiple bike lanes, you'd have a wider footprint. And potentially for this type of corridor, that's not worth that investment, so shared use path can be competitive there. The other treatment that is included in a couple of the southern regions, if you look to alternative 8, I believe it is, that proposes to install a protection system along the existing bike route that is, if you know, that portion of the corridor has a striped bike lane today. So this would install probably about a 2-foot wide concrete 6-inch tall median that would separate your bikes from your vehicle traffic, and that would elevate that facility to what we call a protected bike lane, which would then meet your targets. So there are a couple of options. We've reflected them in a few of the different alternatives, but you are correct that the most common one there is the shared use path solution.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My question has to do with speed limits. My understanding for throughput, oftentimes lowering a speed limit can help with throughput of traffic. And it sounds like you want the roundabouts just to slow traffic down. Is this a behavior that you're trying to modify because you don't believe that if we lower the speed limit that people will adhere to it?
Yes, fundamentally, yes. Today, the corridor is posted at a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit in that northern portion, which I think is what we're talking about here. The travel speeds that we measured, we talk about an 85th percentile speed, which is 85% of the drivers taking that. That is measuring at about 50 or so miles an hour today. At a crosswalk, you really want drivers to be able to slow down to a stop, right? That's an important feature of a crosswalk. A roundabout would control that behavior much more dramatically than any other traffic calming treatment would. And it frankly is very difficult on these larger, high volume arterials to have a lot of tools. You don't have nearly as many tools at your disposal as you do on a neighborhood street where you can put bumps in the roadway and all these different things that are very good at slowing drivers down. So fundamentally, to circle back to your question, yes, we expect that if you just swapped out your signs and you said it's 35-mile-an-hour roadway now, I would expect you'd see some improvement. Maybe you'd see a 10-mile-an-hour difference, but now we're talking about
about 5 off is what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe now you've got your travel speed for most drivers down to 40 miles an hour.
Still too fast.
45. If you look at the data on the correlation between your speeds, your actual speeds, not your posted speed, but your actual driver speed, and a vulnerable pedestrian, you can see a doubling effect in the fatality likelihood, even with a 5-mile-an-hour difference. So from a safety first and foremost approach, yes, it'd be putting that physical device to reinforce the speed control. Admittedly, though, that's a process that could take many years to develop a full corridor of roundabouts, and I wouldn't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I'd still advance, phase one roundabout, phase two roundabout. So you, over time, would see that improvement in the speed. And, you know, you may see it in between intersections. We would hope you would see it in between intersections, but the key that we're zooming in on is those conflict points, which would be your crossing locations.
And so a traffic light instead of a roundabout?
A traffic light is an improvement for pedestrian safety because it's typically very well complied with from drivers. So drivers would have a red light when pedestrians have the walk symbol. So from a safety standpoint, you'd see very good results. Now, the challenge on this corridor is we did evaluate what we call traffic signal warrants, which are, if you look to the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices.
Which I did not for the meeting.
It's a fun read if you ever have, you know, a free evening. But there is a series of warrants which many jurisdictions choose to follow. And those prescribe when it's okay to install a traffic signal. And many of these roadways out here do not qualify for any of those warrants.
Is it volume? What
It's
is
volume related.
Okay.
So your side streets essentially don't have quite enough traffic to trigger the need for a traffic signal. Certainly Sahali does, but it's the side streets that don't. So when you're in that situation, roundabout is your best treatment to improve the safety for pedestrians. If you comb through the handouts, you'll also see there's a number of locations we proposed a different solution, which is a hawk signal. You might know it as a pedestrian hybrid beacon. That's typically installed overhead and kind of does this flashing motion, but it should be treated like a traffic signal where as a driver you see the indications, you stop and provide a safer crossing for pedestrians. So that's the other treatment that we've incorporated here. Again, in those situations where we didn't include the roundabout, you do one or the other. You would not do both. You would do either the hybrid beacon or the roundabout treatment.
Okay, thank you. So with that, another question? Sorry, Sid, I didn't see.
No, sorry, I lifted it while you were talking. So the same with the question about the roundabouts. If we were to go with alternative 2, which is the most stripped down, we would not be precluded from lowering the speed limit because, you know, as a, even if we don't get the full effect, even if we posted at 35 and the 85th percentile speed goes to 45 or 40, we could still consider that.
You
at a
certainly
later date.
could, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Because, I walk or bike a lot of places and people really whip down, especially when sight lines are limited or down a slope. And I would be concerned, whatever alternative we chose, if the capital projects, if the roundabouts, if the physical traffic calming measures were the only approach that we took for pedestrian safety related to speed.
Any other questions? Can we do show and tell now?
Mayor, if I may, just one more quick clarification, if you would, team. I know that some folks feel like even if the side streets don't warrant actual signalized intersections, does roundabout allow you the ability to right turn out to go left to go around the roundabout as opposed to trying to cross traffic to take a left out of a side street? Whereas otherwise you would have to wait a longer time period.
So a roundabout, you're only ever looking at one direction of cars coming at you, and that's just the one immediately to your left side as you're approaching the intersection. So you could make a right turn, you could do a 270-degree movement around the roundabout, you could go straight through, you could even make a U-turn. Because we're keeping the one lane per direction configuration, these would also just be single lane roundabouts where U-turns would be acceptable in all directions. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Should we? Sure.
Okay, do you want to ask your question in here, just so it's recorded?
Sure. So you mentioned a corridor fail. Can you show me on the map where the failure would be?
Certainly. So we'll pop over to the second page here. Maybe if somebody can
I don't think there's any hopping while we get paper cuts.
help me show this. So the failure would be here, Madam Mayor, this intersection today. So there is a challenge with the side street here. So this intersection does have left turn lanes, and this neighborhood you can see is isolated. So this neighborhood must use this intersection. So this is the location where there is that level of service E. It's in the morning when you're trying to get out and, typical commute periods, and there's just so much traffic on Sahala, you can't make inroads there. So this is the one location, as I mentioned, alternative 2 incorporates an intersection improvement here.
Okay.
We would recommend a roundabout for that, and then you'll see that then in all the other schematics for the others.
You want to see it on there, it's Northeast 28th?
Yes, that's Northeast 28th and 223rd.
Yeah, this is Heritage Hills, and then this is.
Yeah, I can't remember the
Yeah,
development
but
there.
yes. 28th,
So-
25th and 28th is Heritage Hills,
Right.
yes. Because 25th is down here,
Yeah.
so to speak, at the traffic light.
Yeah.
Yes, there's 2 entrances to Heritage Hills, but this is the only entrance.
This is the crest.
Yeah,
The crest.
That's what it is.
That's
yeah.
right, yeah.
Okay.
And then I can
What?
give everybody a tour here if that'd be helpful. So the proposed red line here, that's that new segment of sidewalk that I mentioned. This neighborhood today has no connection to a transit stop. Today, the closest transit stop is here at Sahalee Drive. So this would connect there. Here's the other segment of proposed sidewalk. This is in between 36th and 37th on the eastern side of the corridor where we've got the preserve. The dashed, we've got a bus stop at 37th.
Yeah.
And I think there's opportunities as you go through the process of actual design and coordination with King County Metro to potentially, shift some of these bus stops a little bit, or even move them to different intersections if that's relevant for the public to maximize the corridor here. You can see nothing proposed north of 37th. There's also, I'll make a note, if you may remember, the transit study included a proposed intersection project, the transit plan at this intersection. That plan would have expanded into that steep slope area, so it's not at the moment proposed as a core element of this project, but as we get further into that risk analysis, we can examine if that effort of kind of providing a continuous through movement would be acceptable from a geotechnical standpoint here, but at the moment it's not shown or captured in our cost estimating.
And then, Brent, any improvement to the transit stops? Any improvement to the transit stops, i.e., what the stop itself looks like? That's a Metro thing to do. That's not a city. That's not part of the city's obligation. That's King County Metro to build like a bus shelter and that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
I would say technically, unless you want to pay for it.
Yeah.
So they won't reject your urban design money or anything like that if you want some decorative treatments on the corridor.
Just to add on to that really quickly, we are looking at all of our stops, right, as part of the transit enhancement program that's included in the 25 through 2030 tip. So that is something that we are looking at. Of course, since we're doing this work, those improvements, whether it's a bus stop optimization or any of the crosswalks, are of course in sync with our consulting team here, so that we're not doing work and then coming back a few years later with the Sahalee broader work. So we're looking at it from a few different perspectives. So just wanted to put that out there.
So Donald, I was hoping you could show me where the mitigation areas are.
Yeah, so one area of Zone 5 is right here. If you were out on the site, there's a little grassy area and you're right off the fog line right there. This is pretty stable. The other zone is right there. And then that roundabout right there is up against a Zone 7, which is, I would say, out of the 3 zones that have not affected the roadway yet, Zone 7 is there. It's an old landslide, but it probably, based on the topography of it, probably has the least likelihood of movement occurring. That doesn't mean it won't. Right. It just means that this one would go first, this one would go next and be a washout, and then that one would be the least.
5, 6, 7.
Yes, and then if you
And you can look for the gaps where there's nothing built.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's something built here because it's okay.
And it's
Here,
appropriate
okay.
that all the other
Right.
landslides are off the table. At least someone got it.
I was just going to point out one other thing about the transit bus stop improvements. Any significant improvements that we do that's outside of Metro standards, we are going to explore that with our plans, but Metro will probably expect us to maintain those additional increases. So if we add real-time event to those, we might end up having to do those. So we'll be in negotiations with Metro for those. We're going to still explore it, but it's something to think about.
So that segment of lines, that's into creating that proposed turn lane addition for these two neighborhoods. They're small neighborhoods, but they're still important to capture from a safety standpoint. So we've got a few houses here, a few houses here. Neither of those have left turn lane. So that's very, very crayon line version of showing that. There's obviously tapers and. Yes. And because most people will access the corridor from this side, 37th, 36th, as residents want to move into the corridor, they're most likely going to be on this western side already. Sahali as well.
So does the golf course give us any unusual runoff just because you've got a flat surface, or is it just not a problem?
From a stormwater standpoint?
Well, I'm just wondering about just adding to the instability of that general area. Just curious if the golf course creates any unusual problems.
Not that we've
or
identified.
If it's absolutely the same as any other thing.
Yeah.
The top of the plateau is predominantly a glacial till soil, which is pretty much impermeable. People call it alderwood, people call it hardpan. So their golf course is sitting on top of that, and so water will hit that no matter whether it's a forested condition, a residential condition, or a golf course, and it's not going to get down. It's water coming from somewhere else that's getting down into the sand below and causing the instability in this area.
So we're now headed over to schematics for alternatives 7 and 8.
So RFB is what kind of, is that's the, what is that short for?
So that's a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. So if you're a pedestrian, those are the ones that are right next to you. We built one on Southeast 4th Street in the town center. There's a raised crosswalk with an RFB. So they flash a yellow light at the side of the roadway. It's an alternating light. And what's unique about that and important is it's not a red indication for drivers. So they're supposed to stop, and the data shows they do often stop, but there is not a legal requirement for them in the same sense of a traffic signal or that hybrid beacon hawk signal that I was describing earlier. But they're very common and less expensive to install. So we have that proposed in this region here. This is a portion of the city with lower speeds that we identified as we looked at our speed data that were already people driving a little bit slower. That got us to the range of accepting an RFB instead of the more expensive dramatic hawk system there. I'm pointing down at 14th for that crossing.
When I look at these shared paths, for pedestrians and cyclists, I then also think about the electric bikes and the e-bikes who are going to be coming through here, like weaving in and out of pedestrians. Is there any design that's kind of that your industry are working on to kind of mitigate or kind of handle that new vehicle that we're seeing that is just kind of propped up in the last couple of years?
So when we do design work, we have what we... Yep, thanks. When we do design work, we have design speeds, which set some of the criteria for how we design our geometry. So there are certain elements that might be reflected in that by choosing a higher design speed for a faster bicyclist. But you're correct in pointing out the challenge here, and this was something the public noted as well, that some of the pedestrians said I'd feel actually less comfortable using this than a regular sidewalk. So I think it's something to weigh as we evaluate options here. Again, the benefit of installing it is it's much smaller footprint, and it really does have a significant amount of cost savings. And it comes down to that question of really how much are people going to use a facility. So that's one of the questions we're planning to ask the public in the next round here as we share different alternatives. As best you can estimate, would you see yourself biking on the corridor, walking on the corridor? Are there any barriers to that? You know, those types of questions.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful information to hear about that pedestrian e-bike, relationship. And then, because I'm sure we have not come up with any speed limits on electric bikes, how fast they can be traveling if they're in a shared lane with a pedestrian, as opposed to if they're in a designated bike lane. So there's all these, because we're hearing that very much from the public, that it's becoming a problem, becoming something that pedestrians have to deal with. But it would be just interesting to get to figure out like some kind of, as you were saying, usage on those part of the roadway, and if it really is a significant issue. But 10, 15 years from now, it may be a very significant issue.
Sorry, just to point out, in Alternative 8, we are proposing the protected bike lane. You can see here. Separated there on the east, and then on the west side with the raised curb median.
And if you all felt very strongly about it, I will say this lower section and this one here, they really could swap. Either proposed alternative 7 or 8 could have these protected bike lanes if you thought that was an important fixture. Yeah. We didn't find any, last comment on that, we did not in the northern section find any feasible alternatives to put protected bike lanes and a sidewalk and stay within the boundaries of a realistic project with these geotechnical concerns. I mean, if you wanted to spend all the money in the world, you could, but we just didn't think that was something to put on the table here.
I'll apologize.
Yeah, so I will bring up my screen again here. And let's see, here looking at the is that okay?
You know how to do it up there.
Let's pull in a different window. That's fine. Oh. Well, those are the questions for you there. At this point, we do not have a preferred alternative. We are still in the process of narrowing down. Our intent was to narrow down to 3, but you certainly could overrule that decision. And then, as I said, bring those to the public for comment. And then if there's any additional design changes you all would like to request of us, we certainly have budget and have built that into our plan as well, so we can make some tweaks before or after that public process. But the intent then is post-public involvement, we would come back with a recommendation for the council on a preferred alternative based on all the feedback we've heard from you, plus the public input as well. So I'll leave these three questions on the slide there.
So Councilmember Clark has gone through her preference. Would the rest of the council like to weigh in?
Just a question. When we say, so should the third alternative be 7 or 8? The other two alternatives are?
They're proposed as alternative 2,
2, yeah.
which is a spot improvement
Right.
scenario. That's the lowest cost option. And then 3B is the other proposed alternative
Okay, thank you.
based on city staff recommendation.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I'd just say, 2, 3B, I would look at 3B with roundabouts all the way through it, and 8. Thank you.
Do others have, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Lamb.
So I'm just confirming the cost. The cost of alternative 7 is 60 million, and alternative 8 is 82 million. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
I guess I would be for alternative 7, and is there a way to put sidewalks in for 3B? I mean, so I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the costs again. 3B is 33 million, and the next jump is 60 million. I mean, it's double, and I would like to see it more walkable, 3B. So I'd like to add sidewalks on 3B.
Can I ask for clarification?
From 25th down to 8th. Oh, that's existing sidewalk, I'm sorry.
So there's an existing sidewalk on the west side of the street, and for the bulk of that segment, there is no sidewalk on the east side of the street. So the primary difference, one of the primary differences in the cost between that 3B option and 7 and 8 is 7 and 8 do propose to add that sidewalk on the eastern side, which adds quite a bit of cost to the project. Sidewalk or shared use path or similar facility.
So 3B, just to confirm, starting at 25th Street to 8th, there's no sidewalk, right?
There is a sidewalk on the west
On the
today.
west side. Okay.
And it's got a planter strip separating it from a bike lane in the roadway.
Okay, I would be still with 3B, and then number 2 and number 7.
Councilmember Farrell.
So, I like, obviously, 2, 3B, and 8.
Two, 3B, and 8.
The lower cost alternatives are definitely the ones I want to look at first. And as I look at 7, I'm also just looking at the idea of, just the physical barricade, not a full sidewalk, but just the extruded curb thing as the barrier. I want to avoid sidewalks going too far north. Was certainly nothing past the park, but because I know how much it adds cost-wise. So I'm just looking for the cheapest alternative we could possibly get to get a separation of people and traffic. Deputy Mayor Lamb.
I think you said we could add roundabouts later, right? So for alternative 7, could we add roundabouts similar to alternative 8?
You certainly could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just give you what you need.
4 for 8, 2 for 7.
Does that
Yeah.
give us
So,
what we need?
yep, 2, 3B, and 8 are the majority of the head nods today or votes. So I think, does that give you direction to be presented to the community? Okay.
That does on the alternatives. We did have a second question here. If there's any specific information you would like from the public in particular to help with that decision-making process on the preferred alternative, this is the great time to share that with us. Thank you.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that the community needs to know is the cost. So if they're going to make a choice and it's their money, then at least let them know that if you pick 8, here's the price tag. If you pick something, or 7 with roundabouts, here's the price. If it's 3B with roundabouts, here's the price. If it's 3B without the roundabouts, here's the price. I think if you offer it, you would get a better outcome from what you're looking for from the community. Because in the past, a lot of the transportation stuff that was handed out to the public, yeah, I want the Maserati if I can get it at the Cadillac price, but they don't know what that is. So that would be my suggestion there. Thanks.
And to add to that would be timing. So just how long would it take? What kind of disruption should they expect? And the other, because we're talking about a phased approach. And in terms of mitigation, that could be something that we might have to start first. I mean, I could see us looking at that first and then phasing in the other improvements over time. But it's, I think the public, which you probably can't answer for the public, is how will we pay for it? Because they'll look at that number and think, well, how do we do that? It'll seem impossible. So there almost has to be a strategy behind, and the way that this works is, because they want to know, okay, and how much will I be paying again then? So. Councilmember Gupta.
Go ahead. I think it would also be important to make it really clear how the transit improvements play into this. So it's part of it, but it's maybe part of a separate plan. I know that's going to get confusing. It is confusing, but just being really clear about how the two plans play together.
I know.
Councilmember Clark, would you like to talk now?
Yeah, I do really want to. So I think usage, what you brought up here, and interest in, those alternative pathways. Because I know if it will drop us all down to that, what is it called, Saffron area at the intersection, what the interest will be. So.
Have I ignored anyone else? Are we good? Great. I'll start working on mispronouncing names now. Well, I appreciate the depth of this, and we're going to continue to dig in a lot deeper as we understand more about it and understand the ramifications. So expect questions from us. And this is extremely helpful to get us grounded and give us a good starting point. Thank you very much.
Glad to hear it. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you for your time, and we'll be back to council in June. So, we'll also forward on any messages for the upcoming community open house as well, and hopefully we'll have lots of engagement from the community this spring. So, thank you, council.
Now, next up, actually, do you guys want to take a 10-minute break? Just to allow people to move and get the next presentation up? 8:24 is when we'll get back together. Welcome back. Okay, Council, we are on to our next presentation, which will be delivered to us by Rose. Thank you. On Sustainability Program Update, Energy, Smart Eastside, and Green Purchasing and Solarize.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Council. Thanks for having me. Again, I am Rose Weicker. I am the Sustainability Coordinator in the city, and I'm here to provide an update on some of our great programs that we have here that involve sustainability. We'll give Amber a moment. And you can go ahead and go to the first slide. Perfect. So I know you all just had your work session this past Saturday, so this work plan should look familiar to you. We've got a really packed schedule for this coming biennium, and I'm really excited to talk to you about some of these programs tonight. I'm going to start off with E3 PSE's Green Power Program. I am happy to announce that the city is fully enrolled in Green Power for 2025. So by enrolling in Green Power, we are matching 100% of our electricity use with renewable energy like wind and solar, sourced locally from the Pacific Northwest. So we're already making great strides. We additionally have some really exciting outreach coming this year. We're continuing with our regular newsletter articles, a full page for sustainability in each of those newsletters, as well as regular social posts, a revamp of our Sustainable Sammamish Guide, and some neighborhood workshops, which I'll cover a little bit later in this presentation. We've also got some upcoming events that we hope to see council and community members at, including Earth Day, Arbor Day, our farmers markets running April through September, as well as our recycling events throughout the year. Amber, do you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. Oh, back one. Thanks. So tonight I will be specifically focusing on these 3 work plan items, including our Energy Smart Eastside Heat Pump Program, the Green Purchasing Guide, as well as some new programs through our Eastside Climate Partnership with our neighboring Eastside cities. I do want to note on this work plan, we have included the additional funds to enhance sustainability work as passed by council at the budget deliberations. And then we also are continuing with our brand new Sustainability Commission, which has 1 year under its belt. And we're really excited to welcome some new commissioners this coming Thursday at our February meeting. I'd also like to share that through the King County Climate Cities Collaboration, or the K4C, the city will be receiving an updated greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the years of 2022 and 2023. As you may recall, our climate action plan uses a greenhouse gas emissions inventory with a baseline of 2019. So it'll be really exciting to see where the city is at and see the work that we still have left to do. Next slide. So Energy Smart Eastside is our residential home heat pump program in partnership with our other Eastside cities through the Eastside Climate Partnership. The city joined Energy Smart Eastside in Q4 of 2024, so this is a relatively new program for the city. The other Eastside cities have been involved and started Energy Smart Eastside back in 2022. So there's a number of years before Sammamish joined, and so you'll see that reflected in some of the data here. This slide specifically covers the combined permit report, so this is all 6 East Side cities, and you can see some of the progress that this program has made. I do want to note that we are looking at permits specifically for single-family residents. We're looking at the mechanical permits that are issued as alterations or additions. So looking at HVAC permits altogether, and then specifically focusing in on heat pumps. So as you can see, heat pump adoption on the east side has been increasing year over year. And you can see from 2023 to 2024, we really were able to scale up that program. Part of that is the addition of Sammamish, as well as increase in funds and increased community awareness from the start in 2022. So across all 6 East Side cities, there's approximately a 59% adoption rate for heat pumps, which is really wonderful. So we're seeing over half of all HVAC systems installed are heat pumps. And of those heat pumps, 12% are utilizing the Energy Smart East Side incentives. And so those are available specifically for our moderate income and low income residents, either under 150% AMI or 80% AMI. You can see a comparison for each of the different cities here on the right. Sammamish has the highest heat pump adoption rate of all of our neighboring cities, which is really wonderful and something that should be celebrated. And you can see there we do have the lowest percent of those heat pump installs utilizing the Energy Smart East Side incentive. This is explained through us joining the heat pump program at the very end of 2024. So we'd really love to see that number go up, recognizing that this also is specifically targeting our lower income residents. Next slide. So that was the program-wide statistics. Now we're looking specifically at 2024, recognizing that this is, again, just the end of 2024. So we'll have a really great lens into how this program is performing at the end of 2025 when we have a full year of being an active participant. We had some really great numbers. That being said, so you can see our heat pump installations going back to 2021 in this graph on the right here. And as I had mentioned on the previous slide, we've got 66% of all HVAC permits as heat pumps, with 3% using the ESC incentives, which is pretty great starting numbers, having only been involved in this program for 1 quarter. Any questions on these numbers before I move on? We're going to cover program goals in the next slide. Great. So looking forward to this year and the next, as a collective body, the East Side Climate Partnership have looked at these adoption rates and some of the metrics over the last couple of years and established some program-wide goals of 65% residential HVAC permits being heat pumps. As a reminder, the numbers for 2024 was 59% for the program as a whole. Sammamish is already surpassing this number if we maintain the numbers that we were looking at in 2024 at 66%, which is really great. But we are still looking towards 2026 with that 70% HVAC adoption being being heat pumps. So we've still got a little ways to go, and we're really happy with the numbers so far, and we're going to continue to do that community education and outreach. Part of that, we have an upcoming heat pump workshop for Sammamish residents on March 26th at City Hall from 6:30 to 8 p.m. We'll have a heat pump contractor as well as some Energy Smart East Side program staff present to give a presentation to residents who may not be familiar with this technology, answer questions, and generally talk about energy efficiency in the home. So we would love if council and anyone online could please amplify this on your social channels, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. We really want this to be a helpful resource for our Sammamish residents. I'd also like to note here, we do have a target number of installations, and this is in alignment with our Climate Action Plan greenhouse gas reduction goals of 82 moderate income installations and 21 low income installations, utilizing those Energy Smart East Side incentive programs over and above the heat pump adoption that is already happening in the city. We do have some grant dollars to support this work in addition to the budget approved by council for this coming biennium. That is a HERE grant, so that's a home electrification and appliance rebate through the state, focused on adult family homes on the east side, as well as an energy efficiency and conservation block grant through the federal government for just over $120,000. All right, next slide. So moving on from Energy Smart East Side, and we'll have some time at the end for questions. We are also working on our green purchasing guide. So this was one of council's goals for 2024, and we do have a purchasing guide established, and we did run a pilot program with the Parks Department in late 2024 to see how this would work out. We worked with some folks in finance as well to make sure that we're able to accurately track invoices. And what this will look like moving forward is any purchase, and I want to be clear that this is purchase purchase of materials, not contract procurement. So this is materials for events, materials for outreach, any kind of giveaway items, and some of the work that our restoration team is doing as well. Really just tracking and giving credit where credit's due for some of the purchases that are already being made. So purchasing compostable cups for our break room. That's something that's already being done, but we aren't tracking that right now. So being able to track both dollar amounts and also, encourage the purchasers in each department to really be thinking about sustainability at the forefront when they're going to purchase these items. That is the point of this green purchasing guide, and we'll be rolling this out in the coming weeks, starting with a presentation at the February all-staff meeting, and then I will be meeting with individual departments to help answer questions. Obviously, different departments have different purchasing needs, so there might be some nuance in here that we'll be working through as we go through implementation. So this is a really helpful guide for our departments, and we've heard some positive feedback from the Parks team already. Next slide. And the last thing I'd like to cover this evening is a really exciting new program through the East Side Climate Partnership. So this is, again, that group of 6 cities that collaborate on Energy Smart East Side. We are also going to be running a Solarize East Side program for this year. This is essentially a group purchasing model. So by all of our cities working together to promote solar to our residents, we're able to get discounted rates for our residents, as well as provide some education and outreach. So that currently is looking like a workshop in April 23rd, following up that Energy Smart East Side workshop on March 26th again. And this will be also held at Sammamish City Hall from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Similar model to Energy Smart East Side, we will have solar installers and Solarize program staff there to answer questions for residents, set up home assessments, and answer any questions that they might have. So we're really excited. This will be launching in March 2025. You will see information about this program at Earth Day, in our newsletter, on our socials, and at the farmers markets as well throughout the summer. We'll also have links on our website to the Solarize homepage. All right. Next slide, please. And that is a very fast update of some of the many things that we have going on right now. Happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Council, what questions do you have for Rose? Deputy Mayor Lamb.
It's good to see the numbers for the heat pumps, and hopefully, like you said, they'll be improving this year. So the solar thing sounds great, and it's good to see that it's not exclusively for lower incomes, but it's for everybody who's interested in participating. Will you be coming back to talk about the other items in the sustainability work plan during the year?
Yes, we can absolutely schedule some time to talk about some of the other work plan items as we make progress on there. And then we also do try to provide updates in Council's Friday updates as well as items come up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. I would like to also share, speaking of that work plan, we are working currently with sustainability ambassadors to finalize a scope of work, and we're looking at a March 1st launch date for sustainability ambassadors, as well as looking at some additional waste programming options as well.
That sounds really great. If there's no further questions, we can move to the next topic, which, Rose, I believe you're on the hook for again.
Yes, and I'll have Jen come join me as well.
Okay, great. And this will be right-of-way tree inventory and maintenance recommendations report. Sneak in right here.
All right, I'll just go ahead and reintroduce myself for anyone who is just joining online. My name is Rose Weicker. I am the Sustainability Coordinator with the city.
Okay, and hi, good evening, Council. So I'm Jen Ravanelli, and I am the Management Analyst with Public Works.
And this study was also completed with the help of Facet. So that was the chosen consultant for this work. Next slide. All right. So as you may be aware, this work stems from Council's 2024 work plan, and Public Works staff have observed a decline in some of the trees within the right-of-way in recent years. This right-of-way tree study sets the stage to effectively plan for and manage Sammamish's street population, and this work will be continued in 2025. The primary objective of this project was to improve the management of trees within the streetscape. We also asked the consultant, Facet, to examine city code and public works standard language on right-of-way trees ahead of the 2026 code update, where the city must manage the multiple benefits and often competing demands of green and built infrastructure assets. This work also plays into right-sizing the urban forest management plan, in addition to ensuring we are integrating applicable wildland-urban interface information from the state, WUI codes. This study also accomplishes the following goals, which you see on screen, among others from the Comprehensive Plan and Urban Forest Management Plan. The results of this study and analysis were developed into a right-of-way tree study and recommendations report, which has been included as an agenda attachment. Next slide. Thank you. So the city's street tree population within its landscape maintenance zones are managed by the Public Works right-of-way maintenance team, with the remaining trees managed by adjacent private property owners, in this case primarily homeowners associations. The sustainability coordinator, myself, and the city manager's office were involved in this work as it pertains to sustainability, and trees are a key characteristic of Sammamish. Community development staff reviewed the regulatory recommendations, as this study is foundational to work happening later in the biennium. I do want to note that this study did not include parks trees or private trees. There were two main tasks as part of this work. First, an updated GIS inventory of the right-of-way trees. This inventory is an essential component of Sammamish's urban streetscape management and the basis for tracking tree assets, as well as to inform strategic planning to ensure urban forest sustainability and climate resilience. International Society of Arboriculture certified arborists from Facet collected data on city-owned trees in the right-of-way and used this to inform maintenance and planting recommendations. Facet also completed an assessment of tree management-related sections of the 2016 Public Works Standards, the right-of-way tree list, and municipal tree regulations. The report outlines best management practices for establishing a robust street tree canopy covering topics such as soil volume and quality improvement, pruning standards and frequency, tree species diversity, planting guidelines, and strategies for addressing infrastructure conflicts. The city may integrate recommended standards and regulatory considerations outlined in the report into the Public Works standards and municipal code updates. The report also serves as a guide for the Public Works Department and Department of Community Development to inform collaborative stewardship of Sammamish's right-of-way tree assets. The lower three bullets on the right are included in work plan items happening later this biennium. Please note this is foundational work to understand public trees before we begin work on private trees and is step one of many.
Okay, so since Rose covered the background and methodology of the study, I will be covering Facet's findings and recommendations. So first, Facet examined a total of 1,525 trees within the 19 public works maintenance zones, and approximately 1,100 of these trees are maintained by the city. So great news, the majority of the trees examined are in good health. And also, despite the bomb cyclone in November, our maintenance team reports that very few of the city-maintained right-of-way trees were significantly impacted. So this means Facet's findings and maintenance recommendations are still usable by our crews. Looking ahead, we'll be focusing on implementation of Facet's recommendations for ongoing care, prioritizing resiliency, and ensuring accurate data management for the city-maintained trees. So we are happy to report the successful integration of Facet's updated GIS data into CityWorks, our asset management system. And with this update, staff will be able to easily access the database of all the right-of-way trees within our maintenance zones. This data integration will be especially helpful with the Public Works maintenance team workflow. So this means the maintenance team will have access to up-to-date tree data, allowing them to create work orders more efficiently and provide real-time updates like maintenance or removal to CityWorks, and ensures that the data remains current. Next slide. Okay, so from their findings after the physical evaluation was complete, Facet had a number of recommendations for the Public Works maintenance team and future city maintained tree plantings. So immediately, Facet provided guidance for maintenance, such as watering schedules and mulch recommendations to preserve our existing city maintained right-of-way trees. For near-term implementation, the Public Works maintenance crews will use these recommendations as we approach the warmer seasons, and our contractors will be given direction that is in line with Facet's maintenance recommendations, such as pruning schedules and best practices. So as a midterm recommendation, Facet provided guidance on soil and plantings for future city-maintained right-of-way trees, such as considering tree distribution on a block-by-block or street basis. And specifically, Facet recommends planting 2 or 3 tree species at a minimum from different tree families in an intermixed fashion to ensure the tree population and canopy are the most resilient. Facet noted that planting corridors of a single species, though aesthetically beautiful, risk significant loss from introduced pests or diseases, which can be costly for the city. And it is also worth noting that Facet commended the city for the diversity of species on our existing street tree list. Okay, next slide. So the final piece of Facet's report examined the city's existing codes and standards surrounding right-of-way trees and provided recommendations to consider during future code and standards updates. Specific recommendations from Facet include creating consistency in language across codes and standards and adding arboricultural best practices to planting guidance. So this could include adding considerations for tree spacing and updated protections for existing trees during construction. So again, all regulatory recommendations are foundations for future code and standards updates. And so to review, Facet provided the city with an updated right-of-way tree inventory dataset, immediate and midterm maintenance recommendations, and long-term regulatory and policy recommendations. The Public Works Department would like to thank Facet again for all their hard work on this study, and we are excited to look ahead and utilize the study's findings in future work. Next slide. So we have this question for council. Does the council believe this work achieves the council's goals of preserving and enhancing the city's public street tree assets? Thank you.
And thank you for the presentation, Rose and Jen. And now it's time for council to ask questions. Who's first? Councilmember O'Farrell.
Hi, I just have 2 questions. It is related, obviously, to our topic, but maybe it doesn't quite answer your question. But there were just questions that occurred to me when I'm driving around the city and I'm looking at our lovely trees, and especially on our tree line when we're coming up to 28. And I often notice that there are sections of our streets where we have trees and then it's intermittently planted with grass between trees, and then some streets do not have that. They just have either like bare soil or impacted soil that's right there. There's a couple of things planted and then sometimes there isn't. And then, so when I look and I see the grass that's planted between the trees, that has to be mowed and maintained. Did the report say anything about what are we planting as like an understory to those trees, those street line trees? Are we considering that both of those scenarios are not desirable? The grass is not really desirable, like bare soil is also not desirable. Are we thinking about what we should be planting there that would be drought tolerant and would be good for the tree? And then my second question, and then that's all I have for you, is does this report and the findings of it get us any closer to becoming a tree city and going through that process as well?
I'll start with your second question. So Any work in the city that involves trees ultimately does play into our Tree City application. Currently, that application is pending review. I will say that it was approved by our state coordinator, and we're waiting review by the Arbor Day staff. So that application specifically looks at the dollar amounts that we have spent on tree maintenance management studies such as this one, as well as the number of trees planted through volunteer events or otherwise. So I would say, yes, it does play into, but it's not necessarily a key aspect of achieving that Tree City status.
And I can address the first part of your question. So FACET, which, Amber, if it's possible, could we go back to slide 7, which is the regulatory and policy recommendations? So as it's being pulled up, so FACET did provide some recommendations for bioretention areas, and that would potentially apply to future right-of-way tree plantings. So they provided recommendations on like underground structural cells, bioswales, which is considered a bioretention area. These are all design considerations that the city could think about implementing in future standards or things like that. They did provide those recommendations in the report.
Council?
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Please.
Just to add on to what Jen was saying, we do look forward to incorporating these findings into our Public Works Standards update and the right-of-way code update that is planned for this year. There will be some policy considerations that council will need to discuss and provide some next steps for staff, as right-of-way corridors are traditionally for utilities and transportation, and really understanding a tree's role within those corridors will be critical in some of our standards and code update. But this work needed to happen first.
Deputy Mayor Lamb.
I had a question on the zones that were studied. Are there more than 18 zones? Because I'm looking at the map and it seems like there's many more right-of-ways. Am I I guess I'm just not clear why only 17 or 18 zones were studied.
That's a great question. Many areas of the city, the right-of-way vegetation is not maintained by the city. It's in fact the adjacent property owner or likely the HOA in most neighborhoods in the city. So this study looked at areas that the city maintains.
I have a different question, and it has to do with one of your slides that showed about the general health of trees. And you're excited about how well most of the trees are doing. With the 435 that are not doing as well, they're about they're in poor condition. Is there an estimate or an understanding of how many of those could be brought up to health, or is there a measurement for that? Because that's what occurs to me. Like the dead, you're going to remove them at some point. The ones that are critical, they're on life support. But the ones that are in poor condition, I'm just wondering, is there a possibility to bring them up to health, or is it really something that we just are tracking and watching and knowing that they're just going to continue to decline? Now, I know that's different reasons for their problems, but do you have a general idea?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of both. It really is on a tree by tree basis, depending on, there were a number of different data points that could go into a tree being categorized as poor health. Some might be the amount of foliage and over pruning or under watering. So as Dan and his crews are taking this inventory data in our city asset management software, they will be addressing those trees as appropriate. And some of them are marked for monitoring. So I would say it does depend on the tree, but our crews would do everything that they can to keep our trees without having to remove them unless absolutely necessary.
Right. Now, with the HOAs, which I know we don't have any control over at all, I do notice that many HOAs use the same landscaping service. And so what would be interesting is to try to figure out, can we figure out who those landscapers are? The 10 or the 25 that do work here. Is there a way to give them information about our tree health that would actually inform what they do with their HOAs? I'm trying to figure out how to leverage information that you have that could be beneficial to individual homeowners in addition to HOAs. We don't have a great crossover at all with information that way. And I don't know if it's something on the website that we eventually train people to look at, but it's such a wasted opportunity. So that's just something to put out there. Is I wonder if there's no way to solve for that. So I'm expecting an answer like now.
Well, I think it's a great consideration. I think this study was specifically looking at the scope of the trees that Dan's crews maintain. And with that in mind, we had intended for the data facet collected to be used internally. So could look at that maybe down the line, but for right now and just for this, it was intended to be used for specific maintenance.
I would just, add on to that a little bit. Any trees in the right-of-way that are privately maintained, we would need to look at what city resources would be required, right, as we're providing that outreach. And of course, there's always a liability factor of that as well, especially for trees. That's why a lot of this work was done by a certified arborist. There's a lot of liability tied to that. So that would just be a lens we'd want to take a look at in the future if we consider that.
That's helpful to know. Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Lamb.
Can you address the laminated tree rot issue?
I might need to circle back with that. Sorry.
Was there a specific, are you saying citywide or with? Can you be a little bit more specific? That way we can circle back and answer your.
We've received public comment from a few homeowners. I think there was one recently that it affected many of their trees. And so it seems to be there is an issue here in our city with this. And are we doing anything to address this situation? I don't know if it's seeing, because it affects mostly Douglas firs. So are we taking a look at, I know this only addresses our right-of-way trees, but would we be looking at this disease from a parks perspective and from a right-of-way perspective?
I will say, I know in this study, there is a couple page section on pests and diseases, and laminated root rot is addressed. So our teams do have the industry standard best practices for addressing laminated root rot. As far as on a citywide level, I don't think that that's something that is currently in the work plan. Scott, I see you have your hand.
No worries. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's a good question. I think it's no different than any other disease that might befall trees overall. And I think it's really about how do we deal with and address when they're identified with laminate root rot as part of our overall tree code. And I think that's part of what's on the community development work plan as linked into all this. We got a lot of things going on with trees over the next year, and obviously that would be part of that, is to monitoring trees, understanding what it looks like, and then what we might need to do about it, because to my knowledge, there's nothing that fixes that. So then it's just a question of what do we do about it? And I think that's really where the tree code would be from the perspective of the city issuing permits to remove a tree, for instance. I know we did that in part as part of the bomb cyclone response. Some of that was part of that, especially if the tree next to it was identified having been blown over and showing laminated root rot, that there's in all likelihood the tree next to it has it as well. So I think that's a piece of the work that's going to be going on just at a general level, but I don't know that there's anything to be done about it.
If that's it for questions, then thank you very much for the presentation. It was really helpful.
Thank you very much. It was a great study to watch and will be very helpful for Public Works and other departments as well. So we appreciate sharing. Thank you.
Well, love the foundational part. Yep, that's great. And so we'll move on now to council retreat follow-up with our city manager and Mike Sugg.
Yeah, and as as Mike is coming up and getting set up, council, this doesn't need to be, this is going to be a fairly short one since we all were just together on Saturday. I think the main piece that we wanted to focus on for tonight was just essentially a follow-up and a finalization of the work plan, just to be able to share that out. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike and let him take it away once he gets the presentation booted up. And it is short.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and good evening, council. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. As Scott mentioned, a quick presentation here, just 2 slides recapping what we talked about at our retreat on Saturday. As we discussed with this new work plan, we are finally on the correct planning cycle. Previously, we were planning a little bit out of order, where we would adopt the budget and then later on adopt our work plan. Thankfully, we've remedied that and are now better aligning our financial resources with our staff resources by planning them at the same time and on the same biennial schedule. At the retreat, we looked at opportunities for council and the community to engage on the work plan, specifically the major work plan items occurring this year. That's the colorful document that we looked at, shown in the upper right. We also talked about the challenges of the bomb cyclone and how staff put a lot of time into analyzing what went well and what we can do better to strengthen our response in the event of a future emergency. And also how that impacts our work plan for this year. So we had a few new work plan items that added to an already pretty full 2025. We also did a little bit of work plan speed dating, where council members rotated around and spoke to our directors, and you all got a chance to ask your questions. And finally, you confirmed the adopted work plan going forward. At next year's retreat, the plan is to revisit council's adopted goals and definitions of success, since it has been a couple of years since we took a look at those by that point. And then we'll start looking towards planning for the next biennium during your 2026 retreat. And the work plan is now uploaded on the website. It can be found both within the city's budget document as well as on the City Council webpage under the little council resources sidebar, along with your goals and legislative priorities and some other relevant documents. That's all I've got for my short recap. Appreciate council's thoughtful engagement with us at the retreat and on the work plan. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mayor, if there's any questions.
Council, questions? I did not make these, but I am grateful that someone made these. But these are our operating agreements that we came up with at the meeting, and we're going to just have these at our place, our little seats over there, so that we can refer back to them and kind of help us stay grounded in terms of, particularly as we get into interesting and exciting debate going forward. So thank you, Mike, very much for your help actually all day Saturday and staying calm and pleasant. Okay, Mr. City Manager, do you have a report for us?
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a very quick one. Believe it or not, February is kind of flying by, and just a reminder for council and the public that Monday is President's Day holiday, and City Hall will be closed for services that day. I also wanted to put a shout out and a thank you to our fantastic crews that have been out continuing to treat the roads either overnight or very early in the morning, as we have these very cold temperatures, to make sure that the roads are safe to navigate. And so that continues on until the temperatures start to warm up, hopefully, fingers crossed, a little later in the week. But it seems to be changing by the day. So we will continue to be out there working in the community to make sure it's safe for people to move around, as long as the temperature keeps hovering in the sort of a cold or very cold range. So,
thank you. I leaped ahead of public comment, and apparently we should do public comment. Is there anyone in the room that is going to be giving public comment? Who's been waiting patiently?
James Eastman, Sammamish, Washington. Great meeting tonight. I really like this new format, or I guess it's a study session format, but I feel like we've been a lot more collaborative the last couple city council meetings. It's really encouraging. It was really interesting on the Sahali Way improvements. I'd like to see the city maybe go on the offensive on that project. It's probably $100 million worth of investment there for very little that we put into it over the years. We go seek that water out, get a hold of it, put some cisterns in, have cameras on those cisterns that anybody can pull up at any time and see what the water's doing, alarms that go off, whatever it takes to protect that investment. If that fails, that would be a huge shame. Also, my favorite beautification projects in the Northwest driving wise is probably the Mountains of Sound Greenway coming down Snoqualmie Pass, and that elevated stretch there. It's just, that's my number one all-time favorite project. Number two is probably coming out of the Mount Baker Tunnel going over I-90, floating bridge. I think third would be East Lake Sammamish Parkway, just driving it and all the beautiful sections. And so Hollyway has a fun, adventurous feel to it as well, coming up, not knowing what's up there, who lives up there, whatever. It's a great opportunity for some beautification. I'm disgusted, absolutely disgusted by going over the floating bridge now and seeing the steel that they put in for the light rail. It's just galvanized box steel. It's awful looking. It's like they could have made it decorative steel, you know, given an old London feel, and had it add to the beautification of that corridor, but they ruined it. Well, they didn't ruin it all the way, but it drives me crazy. So with this Sahali Way project, we have the Evans Creek Trailhead. We have these two pedestrian crossings we put in. I'd love for those to just be beautification projects. Welcome to our city. Maybe some light poles, some places we could hang banners, maybe some flowered areas. We'll have that joint use path there on the one side. I'd love for that to continue all the way to the East Lake Sammamish Trail. Combining that with the Emerald Necklace Trail, we can go through Timberline or even around it. At a certain point, though, when you get to the barricade, you get down to 20% slope, which is way too steep for bikes and for pedestrians. That's where I come in. I have property there, so let's connect it to my property. Let's get a 10% slope trail and same sort of beautification once we get to the parkway, cross that, and then get down to the East Lake Sammamish Trail. So if you could just, I don't know, allocate a little bit of money for beautification there at our city limits. Welcome to our city. This is Sammamish. It's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that needs to? Okay, then is there anybody online?
Yes, pre-registered callers, please raise your hand if you'd like to have comment.
Hello, this is Jan Bird from Sammamish, and although I haven't read the whole report, the right-of-way tree study and the recommendations, I'm just really impressed with the thoroughness of it. It included the tree inventory of our street trees, maintenance recommendations, how it relates to the tree code, how to improve the tree code, and just really good maps. So I thought it was very well done. But of course, my next thought was, when are we going to do the same thing for our parks? That's where most of our canopy is, and that's where they've been struggling for a long time. And of course, with the bomb cyclone destroying about 300 trees, we lost a lot of our canopy in the parks. So if we can't hire an urban forester, which I think we really, long-term, we need to do that, at the very least in 2026, I think we need to begin to do a similar tree study and recommendation for our parks. And it's interesting, Rose and I both agree on one thing, this current study is just a great foundation for going on to the next phase for parks. And I think the recommendations of what to plant and where to get the best outcome given that climate change is an issue at this point. I mentioned there's all sorts of opinions about assisted migration. And at this point, we need to have a little bit of someone who can do a deep dive into, what would be the best for us to follow at this point in time. Another point I'd like to make is that residents who follow the urban forest management plan and its development over many years, it feels like it's kind of missing in action. And I know there are bits and pieces that have, like tonight, they're being talked about, but they're all in various departments. And of course, by its very nature, it's an interdepartmental project. I'm asking that the city put together, excuse me, some kind of graphic and a report for the general public that just shows the status of the plan, the goals for 2025 and 26, including what department's responsible for which piece. Make it easy to find on the web page. And also, if you could do a story in the city newsletter, that would be really helpful. And another question I had is, normally code work comes out of the Planning Commission. And since the Sustainability Commission is also supposed to be the tree board, I hope they're going to be meeting jointly with the Planning Commission, but I don't know if that's the case. So I'd like to see that. And also looking at the canopy study that Public Works is doing for their NPDES permit. I believe that's this year. Is there enough information in there to qualify to give us all the information we need for our urban forest management plan? And if we need to add some more data to be collected, let's do that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Okay, we'll go to our next public comment.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter. I'm running on low resources, so you just get my name instead of my face. I hope you can hear me. I wanted to thank everyone for the great presentations tonight and all the work that the staff does. I wanted to speak first to the Sahali Way project. A lot of good ideas. It was really great to hear with replete information about the geotechnical landslide hazards and all the events that have happened there. I would suggest a few things. 244th this year, where you leave Sammamish and you go out to King County to the traffic signal there. They had a landslide that shut the road. Might be worth staff or somebody talking with King County, because that was a multi-million-dollar project that also impacted the water mains for quite a bit of money, and just find out what went on there. And then while we have excellent staff and people working, I'm not sure how many of them were around when this city did 212th, which is Snake Hill Road. That road, the city had kind of put $1 million aside every year to just kind of see if they would fix it one day. The road split apart. They did go through a whole rebuild of the road, and it's really nice now. That was a $9 million project that turned into an $11 million project just to save the road. So if there's any technical information, hazards information, or engineering approaches, I think talking with the people that did that would be good. I also wanted to talk a little bit about stormwater. Obviously, if you don't do the water on Sahali, you're going to have problems because there have already been past problems. I know in the last, maybe it was around 2020, there were multiple landslides in Evans Creek Preserve, which is the park just to the right side of the road to the east going up there. I don't know if any of those landslides complicate or add to the ones that would be coming off Sahali, but that's worth looking at as well. In picking the choices for Sahali, I went to about 3 to 6 meetings on it in about 2015, 2016, and it was about 14.3 or 14.6 million at that time. And the people, particularly a lot of people who lived in Sahali and the other neighborhoods on the side, said, we're not really sure what spending this money gets us. So either don't do the project, the lipstick on a pig thing, or find out what it does do. So I think I'm glad that they're only doing like 2 or 3 alternatives instead of the 10, because the critical areas really limited that. But I think it's really important to say, hey, a roundabout does slow people down. Let's not do them all over. Let's just have one that does that let's go ahead and post the speed limit at 35. If you've driven by the Sammamish Landing Park, people do actually slow down now. It took them a couple years to learn that, but they do. And then it's got some of those crosswalks. And I think that the city and or the consultants should take pictures of the crosswalks at Sammamish Landing and also the ones down by where the 7-Eleven used to be, because there's nice crosswalks there, so people know what you're talking about when you're talking traffic mitigation. Anyway, great meeting. Thanks for my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mary.
If you'd like to give public comment, please raise your hand. Looks like that's it.
Okay, then I'll go back to council reports unless, were you done, Mr. City Manager? Thank you. Okay, council reports.
Have a solid waste committee meeting on Friday, and I will send out the agenda.
I have an Eastside Fire Rescue meeting on Thursday and an emergency management meeting with King County tomorrow. Anybody else?
I believe tomorrow's PIC meeting is just an orientation, so there's no agenda to bring to council. And Mayor is, or I guess Councilmember Treen, I think ETP is canceled this month, right? Yeah.
Valentine's Day.
Well, that's important. Someone call my husband. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn unless someone else would like to say something very important. Oh, dang it. Good night, everybody. Again, call my husband.
Certain things just don't mix.
Ready, Sammy? Fetch! I should have got a dog.
And in the Pacific Northwest, pet waste and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pet waste bacteria to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Pick up pet waste every time, even in your own backyard, and throw it in the trash. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things
Cheese whip on that?
just don't mix. And in the Pacific Northwest, vehicle leaks and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pollutants from cars to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Fix car leaks as soon as you detect them. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things just don't mix.
Ready, Sammy? Fetch! I should have got a dog.
And in the Pacific Northwest, pet waste and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pet waste bacteria to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Pick up pet waste every time, even in your own backyard, and throw it in the trash. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things
Cheese whip on that?
just don't mix. And in the Pacific Northwest, vehicle leaks and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pollutants from cars to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Fix car leaks as soon as you detect them. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things just don't mix.
Ready, Sammy? Fetch! I should have got a dog.
And in the Pacific Northwest, pet waste and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pet waste bacteria to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Pick up pet waste every time, even in your own backyard, and throw it in the trash. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things
Cheese whip on that?
just don't mix. And in the Pacific Northwest, vehicle leaks and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pollutants from cars to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Fix car leaks as soon as you detect them. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things just don't mix.
Ready, Sammy? Fetch! I should have got a dog.
And in the Pacific Northwest, pet waste and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pet waste bacteria to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Pick up pet waste every time, even in your own backyard, and throw it in the trash. Healthy families, healthy communities, healthy Puget Sound. Now that's a perfect mix. PugetSoundStartsHere.org. Certain things
Cheese whip on that?
just don't mix. And in the Pacific Northwest, vehicle leaks and Puget Sound certainly don't mix. When it rains, water carries pollutants from cars to storm drains that lead to our rivers, streams, lakes, and Puget Sound. Fix car leaks as soon